The Fall of the House of Usher, a Edgar Allan Poe horror story. The House of Usher began to collapse long before the first crack appeared on its walls. I sensed this even before arriving, when the air around the estate felt unnaturally still, as if time itself had slowed and thickened. Even the sound of footsteps seemed to fade before reaching the stone. The letter from its owner was brief and anxious, a request for a visit written in a tone that felt less like an invitation and more like a farewell. The mansion stood beside a dark tarn that reflected its facade with disturbing precision. The stone looked ancient and exhausted, as though the house had resisted something inevitable for far too long. A narrow fissure ran from the roof down to the water's edge, like a wound caused not by age, but by some inner strain. As I stared at it, I felt an unsettling impression that the crack reacted to my presence, widening ever so slightly. Inside, silence pressed in from all sides. It was not empty, but expectant. The owner greeted me pale and agitated, his movements abrupt, his attention constantly drifting toward the walls and ceiling. At times he paused mid-sentence, as if afraid the house itself was listening. It felt as though he was not speaking to me, but negotiating with the building around us. He claimed the house was alive, that its walls could hear and its floors remembered the footsteps of the dead. He spoke of corridors that grew longer at night, of furniture that seemed subtly rearranged by unseen hands. His affliction, he said, was not of the body, but of perception. Light caused pain, sounds became unbearable, and the smallest noise triggered waves of irrational terror. Yet his greatest fear was his sister, long confined to her bed. He insisted there was a bond between her and the house, as though they shared a single breath. The nights were filled with dull sounds, scraping, thudding, careful movements within the walls. At times it seemed the house itself was breathing, slow and labored. Though he dismissed it as old beams and settling stone, his trembling hands betrayed him. Sleep came rarely and never without light. When he told me his sister had died, there was no relief in his voice. Her body was placed hastily in the family vault beneath the house, as if remaining near her for too long posed a danger. After that, everything changed. The fissure on the facade grew more pronounced. The air inside became heavier, saturated with dampness and dread. At night, the sounds took on rhythm, slow footsteps ascending from below. One evening, he confessed his fear. He believed his sister was not truly dead, that the house had refused to release her, that the walls preserved not only memory, but fragments of life itself. His voice shook as he claimed to hear her from the depths of the estate, as though the house sought to restore a lost balance. When the scream finally came, doubt vanished. It was neither human nor spectral, it belonged to the house. Doors burst open, and his sister appeared in the hall, pale and distorted, shaped by fear and stone alike. In that instant, the walls convulsed. The house groaned like a living creature and began to collapse from within. I fled as stone and timber crashed behind me. The fissure split wide, and the mansion slowly sank into the black waters of the tarn. The surface closed without a sound, as though the house had merely returned to where it belonged. In the reflection, not only the building vanished, but the very memory of the house of Usher itself. The Masque of the Red Death, an Edgar Allan Poe horror story. The prince's castle was alive with laughter and music, yet beyond its walls, the Red Death raged unseen. Legends spoke of a plague that swept the land with ruthless speed, sparing no one. As I approached, the air grew heavy, tinged with an ominous scent, and the sky seemed veiled in blood-red light. The prince, immersed in lavish luxury, appeared cut off from reality, as though walls of gold and velvet could hold the horrors at bay. The halls were a sequence of rooms, each decorated in a distinct color, with candles flickering, casting shadows that moved independently. Guests, masked and dressed in ornate costumes, danced and laughed, yet a subtle unease lingered in every glance. Each footstep echoed oddly in the vast corridors, as if the castle itself were alive and aware of the creeping danger outside. The flickering light revealed strange reflections in the mirrors, faces distorted, shadows stretching unnaturally, as if the castle were mocking the inhabitants. The prince moved among his guests, greeting them with charm and gestures of confidence, yet a fleeting apprehension betrayed him in the glint of his eyes. He spoke of mastery over fear, insisting that the castle's walls could withstand any threat. Yet every step accentuated the contrast, luxury and joy on one side, the creeping dread on the other. The castle's details intensified the terror. Carpets muffled footsteps but amplified sudden noises. The air felt dense, as if each breath carried the chill of approaching death. Guests exchanged glances, sensing danger they could neither name nor see. The faint scent of decay slipped through the halls, invisible yet suffocating, pressing on every guest with quiet inevitability. Flickering candle flames threw long, twisting shadows that seemed to reach for the dancers, while the mirrors multiplied the effects, creating an endless maze of fear. At midnight, a stranger appeared in the final room. Clad in black with a blood-red mask reflecting candlelight, he moved deliberately, each step echoing ominously through the corridors. Guests froze, laughter ceased, panic ignited in their eyes. The prince attempted to confront him with words, but his voice broke in terror. The figure moved calmly among the guests, a living shadow approaching the prince. It was no guest but the embodiment of the Red Death itself. The castle, once impervious, became a trap. Guests tried to flee, yet the golden, velvet-lined corridors stretched endlessly. Those who believed themselves safe were prisoners of vanity and opulence. The prince confronted the figure desperately, but the touch of the mask ended his life. Guests fell one by one, their eyes reflecting the inevitability of death. Candle flames flickered violently, casting elongated shadows that merged with the fallen. Whispers of fear echoed through the halls, mingling with faint, haunting laughter from rooms emptied too soon. Every ornate detail, the gilded frames, the velvet curtains, the rich tapestries, became part of the macabre theater. The castle, once brimming with music and joy, transformed into a stage for death's final triumph. Outside, the world was silent, the Red Death prevailing, and within the castle remained a cold mausoleum, echoing with the last traces of vanished life. Ligeia, Edgar Allan Poe horror story. I cannot recall how, when, or even precisely where I first came to know Lady Ligeia. There was something in her presence that resisted the ordinary workings of memory, as though the mind itself recoiled from attempting to reduce her to facts and dates. I remember no origin, no beginning, only the certainty that from the moment she entered my life, all that came before seemed trivial and distant. Her intellect was immeasurable. She spoke with a calm authority that admitted no doubt, as if every thought had already been tested against eternity. She read ancient texts with unsettling ease, lingering over passages that spoke of mortality, decay, and the limits imposed upon mankind. Yet she rejected those limits entirely. To her, death was not a law, merely a convention accepted by the weak. Her eyes were the true source of my unrest. I could never define their color, for it seemed to change with the light and with her mood. At times they appeared dark as forgotten vaults, at others they shone with a pale inner fire. When she fixed her gaze upon me, I felt not observed, but penetrated, as though she looked through flesh and thought alike. Our marriage unfolded without joy or ceremony. We withdrew from society into a crumbling abbey beside the Rhine, where the air itself seemed heavy with memory. There, Ligeia's body began its slow betrayal. Her strength faded, her steps weakened, yet her will hardened. Even as pain hollowed her frame, her mind grew sharper, more defiant. She spoke incessantly of the power of human will, not as philosophy, but as fact. On her final night, she summoned what little breath remained to whisper verses whose meaning escaped me, though their intent was unmistakable. They spoke of resistance, of refusal. When at last her voice failed and her body lay still, the chamber felt unnaturally vacant, as though something essential had been violently removed. I believed time might dull my grief. It did not. Instead, it drove me elsewhere into another marriage, another life. Lady Rowena was everything Ligeia had not been, gentle, submissive, profoundly human. Yet from the moment she entered the vast, grotesquely adorned chamber that became our home, her health declined. She complained of unseen presences, of movements in the corners of her sight. I dismissed these fears until I began to share them. On the night of her supposed death, a tremor passed through her lifeless form, then another. She rose, fell, and rose again, each convulsion more violent than the last. At last, she stood before me, swathed in burial cloth, unsteady yet undeniably alive. As the light reached her face, my blood turned cold. The features were altered, the expression was wrong, and the eyes, those immeasurable, indefinable eyes, were Ligeia's, not revived by chance, not restored by love, but reclaimed by will alone. The facts in the case of M. Valdemar, Edgar Allan Poe horror story. At the very moment Martin Valdemar's heart ceased to beat, he spoke. This was no trick of timing, no illusion of the senses. His voice came, sharp, unmistakable, immediately after his official death. I bore witness to this with my own eyes, and I must recount the events without embellishment, speculation, or any attempt to rationalize what transpired. Valdemar had suffered from an incurable disease that wasted his body, reducing it to a grotesque shadow of its former self. His frail body seemed ethereal, with ribs jutting out as if they were the framework of a forgotten relic. His breathing was faint, his movements slow and hollow, but his mind remained sharp and lucid. It was this clarity of thought that allowed him to volunteer for an experiment to determine whether the human mind could survive beyond death under hypnosis. On the night of the experiment, Valdemar was placed under a deep hypnotic trance. His pulse became weaker, his skin assumed a gray, cadaverous hue, and his breathing became almost imperceptible. The attending physician declared him dead. Despite the apparent cessation of all vital functions, there was something, an intangible force, holding the air in that room in a state of charged silence. I asked him a question. His lips did not move, his jaw remained fixed in place, but from deep within his throat came a dry, mechanical rasp, an unnerving, unnatural sound. He confirmed that he was aware of his condition, that he was dead, but that his consciousness persisted through the hypnotic suggestion alone. In the weeks that followed, Valdemar's body showed no signs of decay. It remained still, neither breathing nor moving, yet it responded to our questions with chilling clarity. He was aware, he said, of existing in a state beyond sleep and death. His mind was suspended in a timeless existence, free from pain but devoid of comfort. The presence of the body soon began to induce a deep unease in those who visited. A sense of dread seemed to emanate from the very walls of the chamber. Attendants began reporting strange sensations, nausea, dizziness, an overwhelming sense of fear. Whispers spread among the staff, some suggesting that the room had become cursed. The body had become a focal point for terror, its very existence challenging the laws of nature. Finally, the hypnotic suggestion was lifted. What followed defies description. Valdemar's body, which had remained motionless for so long, collapsed into a shapeless, repulsive mass, as though all the decay of months had struck in an instant. The stench was overwhelming, and the sight of the remains was beyond comprehension. Within seconds, there was nothing left that resembled a human form. Thus, the case of Martin Valdemar reached its conclusion. I offer no explanation for what occurred. The facts, as they are, speak for themselves. But one truth remains undeniable. The human mind, it seems, has the power to endure even when the body has relinquished its claim to life. And if the mind can persist beyond death, what then happens when that fragile thread is severed? What is released when the will to exist is finally withdrawn? These are questions that no one may ever truly answer, but they will linger, haunting the boundaries of our understanding. And so, dear reader, I leave it to you to ponder the mystery for yourself.